Hey, Gaia, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I must say that I do love your first name.
Thank you.
Your parents named you so well. Gaia is such a beautiful name. When I saw the name, I thought, well, the book's interesting, but the name's great. So let's bring Dr. Bernstein into the show. So there's many things we can talk about here. And I love your area of expertise, which is gaining control over addictive technologies, which is the name of your new book as well. So I'm going to start off by asking you just a very simple question. Do you feel that we are suffering because of our addiction to technology, or are we not better off because of technology?
The answer is probably yes to both. Technology has advanced our lives in many ways, and I love technology. That's why I've spent my career writing about law and technology.
Exactly, yes.
And I think the problem is that while with smartphones and the internet, we got so many options we never had before, so many conveniences, so many opportunities to connect. In a way, things have gone too far because we are so connected. We spend so many hours on our screens. I think if somebody would have come and asked us, in 2009, when I think we started using smartphones a lot and we're basically with our screens on the move, if we would like to spend 5 hours on our phone, another 3 hours on our iPad, and another 5 hours on our computer a day, I don't think we would have said yes to that. So I think it's not a matter of technology is good or bad. It's a matter of degree and how much of it.
Okay. So what you're saying, technology is good, but the way we interact with it can be improved.
Right. I think it's about finding a better balance, a better online, offline balance. And I think the problem lies in the fact that we did not really make this decision to spend so much time on our screens.
Yes.
And it's a huge decision. I mean, basically, this is our life. Do we want to spend so much time on screens, or do we want to do something else? And it's sort of happened to us through many, many small decisions of, just adopting another app or just, using our cell phone on the go. I remember how it happened to me. And around 2009, when I got my first smartphone and I commuted from Manhattan to my law school in New Jersey. And I thought, okay, so I have 3 small kids at home, and I can be very effective. I'm going to text babysitters on the way to organize the day. And then I thought, well, actually, I can do even better. I'm going to start answering my emails before I get to work, so I can be more effective when I get to work. And then I joined Facebook because I thought many of my colleagues are on Facebook, and it's a great way to get to know them. And before I knew that, I would be sitting in one of these train cars, and a colleague could be sitting next to me, or a student. I wouldn't even see them. I was completely buried in my phone. And as it progressed, everywhere I went, I was buried in my phone, or I went to an doctor's office in the waiting room. I'd get my laptop out. And it was just many, many small decisions which accumulated to a life surrounded by screens. And I don't think I'm unique in that way.
Who decides how much is too much screen time? How do we know what is too much?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I don't think too much is the same for everyone, but I think it's about being able to make an autonomous decision of what is too much for you. And right now, it's not an individual who is making a decision. It's basically the tech companies whose business model is based on making sure we spend as much time as possible on our screens. So that I guess there are 2 parts to answer what you're asking. First of all, who is the real decision maker? Why are they making this decision? And I think many people are familiar with the business model on the internet. We get so many things for free. we get Gmail for free, we get Facebook for free, Instagram for free, and we pay with our data and our time. So companies collect our data. The goal is to target advertising at us, but in order to get more data, they have to make sure we spend more time online. And once they collect the data, they want to target the advertising. So again, we need to be online for longer. That is the whole revenue model. So tech companies have used many known psychological principles to make sure we spend as much time online as possible.
Yes. But is that a bad thing? Isn't that their job to make people want to spend time online?
So I think their job is to make sure they increase their revenue. But it does not mean that they should be using manipulations which affect people in a harmful way.
Yes.
Cigarette companies' job was to sell cigarettes. It does not mean they should have sold harmful products. So I think that tech companies had the advantage of that everything they do is not transparent to us. We don't really see how we're manipulated to spending much more time online. So basically, there's no one to say this is enough. Until recently, when more whistleblowers from Silicon Valley have come out and revealed what's going on. But still, when you and I just look at our screens, I mean, with everything I know today, I still too often just sit to work and find myself half an hour later surfing the internet aimlessly, just clicking on Facebook, clicking on Instagram, going on Twitter. I know I don't intend to do that, and I should know better, but I am not making. Everything is stacked against my decision-making power.
Yes, I can see that. So let's just unpack a couple of things you said, which are very interesting, and I appreciate you for sharing this. Use the example of tobacco companies, right? So
Yeah.
you obviously know the subject matter better than I do because it's your area of expertise. So looking outside in, tobacco had nicotine, which was addictive, which was proven to be addictive and obviously caused a whole lot of terrible, horrible health effects. But there's nothing particularly bad about the technology companies that we've identified. In fact, there's an argument to be made, and this argument is just one argument, is that if I, for example, use my phone, and I'm on my phone quite a bit, am I on my phone because Apple makes this great phone, or is it because I love reading the Financial Times app and I'm actually addicted to the Financial Times, and the technology company is just a medium?
Right. So first of all, if all you're doing is reading the Financial Times app, you're quite unique. My guess is that's not the only thing you would be doing on your phone. And so the question is, what's harmful in what tech companies are doing? That's an area where we've been seeing a lot of evidence coming out. And I think we first of all have to separate the data that's coming out for children from the data about adults. The data about children is quite alarming, and I think it's at this point.
Could you share some of the
clear.
data for the audience? What's alarming about it?
Okay, so for children, there is significant data about scientific data about effect on mental health, and so you can see it's becoming even more specific. For example, there's a lot of data showing that social networks have bad effects, particularly for girls, on mental health. There's a lot of data showing that a certain number of kids become addicted even under clinical addiction definition. That's more often happens with people who play games.
Yes.
And on top of that, there is significant data coming out showing that there's an impact on cognitive development, on not just cognitive development for very small kids, but all the way to age 18. And not just psychology studies, but also brain scans showing differences between the brain images of kids who are exposed to a lot of computers, a lot of screen time versus those who are not. There's more information about the effects on sleep, the effect on hyperactivity. There is a lot, the amounts, and I think, at first people said there's not enough data, let us wait and see. And really what we've seen is what I call the science wars, which often happens when a powerful industry comes out with a harmful product. So somebody says this is harmful, and then scientists come up with research. The industry says this is not true. They come up with their own research. And this can go on for years, even with tobacco, which, retroactively, there's no doubt that tobacco is harmful. The first studies came out in the 1950s. It took to 1964 for the Surgeon General to say that smoking is a health hazard. And it took to the 1990s for smokers to start winning litigation and for public spaces to become smoke-free.
In preparing for the interview, I read a striking statistic which said that many of the tech executives limit the screen time for their own kids, actually. They don't allow their kids to have unfettered access to cell phones and technology. They have limited screen time. And I'm not sure why they do that, but it would seem to indicate they think it's not beneficial for their own kids' development.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they do this, and I think they know why they're doing it. But I think they won't be able to win their own game, because I think once kids reach middle school, it doesn't really work to limit their time anymore. So they have created some kind of monster that even they won't be able to compete with.
So when you talk about tech companies, yeah, I've noticed that you're referring to the hardware companies. I'm going to use Apple as an example because they do have one of the most famous phones and screens in the world. But you're also referring to the publishing companies, because all those statistics you provided, they're driven by the fact that kids are observing certain things on their phones or iPads, for example. And those things they're observing and interacting with is produced by and large not by the big tech companies, but by publishers. Instagram is owned by a tech company, but things they do and interact with is not necessarily tech companies. There's also publishing houses that put out these things. So when you refer to tech, are you including not just the tech companies, but also what's on the phones?
Right. So first of all, I'm definitely talking about the phones themselves,
Yes.
which are made in a way that's as alluring as possible.
So pretty.
Yeah, and also notifications keep coming up. The default is that everything is bright and shiny, and you can't resist it. And on top of that, I assume what you call publishing companies, I'm talking, I guess, not so much about the content. This is a separate issue, what kids are exposed to specifically, but about the way websites like Instagram or TikTok, or even YouTube or Netflix, where they keep showing one video after another.
Yes.
There's no stopping points. So it's not so much about what the kids see, although sometimes it is an issue as well. It's more about the way it's designed for them never to stop being on it.
Yes, I see what you mean. So an example of this for the audience is that if you run a YouTube video, it just keeps on showing you more and more videos, I think for hours on end, until you go down this rabbit hole.
Right. And I think actually one of the most shocking examples, I would say, is Snapchat. And I think this really exemplifies what's going on, because basically Snapchat has a feature called Snap Streaks. And Snap Streaks is the idea, and the kids are much more into this, not adults, that if you send a streak to somebody that day and they return it the same day, you get on this list and you start getting badges. So the more days you keep sending these streaks back and forth, the more badges you have on your list, and you have many people on your list. It's a bit like shows who your friends are. And there's no content in this. The only thing is to get people back on Snapchat. So they'll send something and then they will see the advertising. And so the whole, I think that's the extreme example of where there's really no content, but the idea of getting someone back on the website. And if you miss a day, you miss your whole snap streak. You have to start again from zero, which is devastating for kids because they lose their friend charts.
Yes, I can see how that can be a problem. Considering I don't have kids, obviously, I'm not someone who's directly exposed to the negative effects. But let's shift gears a little bit here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I read a very interesting book recently. I forget the name of the book, but it talked about the development of books as a technology. We don't think of a printed book as a technology, but the arrival of movable type, their ability to publish ideas that were considered heresy, put the church up in arms, and people started reading. They became addicted to reading. Publishing companies created ways to make books more addictive. We had the advent of libraries, which made it easier for people to read. Now, that's an example of a new technology that when it arrived, what people said it's going to take down the world because it exposed people to things they hadn't seen before. To some degree, isn't this the same argument we're making about technology?
I think this is a great question. That's a question I was struggling with as I was writing the book. Am I just saying something is wrong here because this is not the technology of my generation, it's the technology of my kids' generation? And actually a wise colleague came up to me into my office when I started working on this and told me, Gaia, why I was thinking about this. Isn't this the same like when people were using these large newspapers and reading them on the train and sort of isolating themselves from everybody else? What's the difference? You're saying people are isolated behind screens. Isn't this the same thing? So I think there's still something very, very different here, because I don't think we had this so much manipulation, so much hidden manipulation, and also the fact that this follows us everywhere we go. You would not walk in the street reading a book. Now you walk in the street with your phone. I walk in the street in New York and I use my headphones and I'm listening to something. People talk to me and I'm not really paying attention.
Yes.
So and even if we compare it to, I would say, the TV got so much criticism, decades before all this happened. Something is qualitatively different here, because at least with the TV, people, it's true they were watching TV for many hours, but of course you could not take it anywhere. But also people call the TV the human bonfire. Everybody was watching the TV at the same time. They were watching the same thing. Here, people can be together. And that's another effect of the technology, which affects adults and children alike. Basically, you can sit in the same room, but each person is looking at something else. And I think for me, the moment I really realized it sort of struck me, was the night that Trump won the election in 2016. And everybody at that point was very surprised. People thought Hillary was going to win. There were lots of people in the living room I was sitting in, and the TV was on, but nobody was really looking at the TV. Nobody was talking. Everybody was texting somebody else on their phone or looking for more information on the phone. And nobody's really discussing together what was happening. And I think that was one of the moments that struck me that something is very, very different here.
Yeah, that's well said. I can see that. So let's just go back to this argument of it being more manipulative, I think the word is. And I'm not debating that point. I mean, I don't know how tech companies do things. Maybe they are manipulative. But do you not feel that in the older days when you had one editor controlling what is put out in a newspaper, in a sense that is more manipulative versus being able to go onto your phone and be able to pull up 1,000 and more viewpoints? And then you get to choose which one you want to follow.
Right. Well, I think, obviously there's something great about the internet, that we have so much information. Yes. Whether we completely choose what we want to see is a different issue. And I think the problem is that, at least before, if you chose one newspaper, you knew what you were choosing. You would choose the New York Times. If you were more left-wing, you would choose the Wall Street Journal. If you were more right-wing, you made a choice. You made an autonomous choice of what you were choosing. For now, if you go on the internet, for example, I go on Facebook. That's my social network of choice, and I see lots of news items which are posted. But basically, I do not see the whole uniform of news items. I see the kind of news items that I'm likely to agree with, that my friends are likely to agree with. So I'm no longer exposed, and I don't even realize how much I'm not exposed to what everybody else is seeing. So the thing is, this is part of the manipulation, the algorithms.
They feel there's this echo chamber.
There is this echo chambers, and also there is the manipulation is so subtle. And so, and I'm happy to discuss more of how the techniques which are being used here.
Yeah, let's discuss them, because the best kind of manipulation is usually subtle. So let's lay it out there.
Right. So basically, there are several, I would say 3 main strategies that are used to manipulate us to spend more time online. And they're behind many of the features that we see all over the internet. So one is that what's called the intermittent reward model.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we basically, when we get a reward once in a while, not on a regular basis, our brains is more likely to release dopamine, the pleasure-enhancing neurotransmitter. So this is why slot machines are so successful, because you never know when the coins are going to come through, and you keep pulling and pulling. Now, so many features in the internet are designed this way. So whether it's, the likes and the comments you can get on social networks, or even when you pull on your email to see if you got a new email, or you go in Tinder and you swipe to see if you got a new match, or and it's basically the fact that you always swipe down to see what else has come new. You don't know what's new, but you keep looking. And on games, there was something called loot boxes, which are surprise prizes you could get. You don't know what's inside them. Tons and tons of things are based on us getting these dopamine releases, and that's why we keep going back, because it makes us feel good for a minute. So that is one a big principle of how our time is extended.
Okay, that makes sense. I can see that happening. I remember reading somewhere that when people get a message, the fact that they got a message is more important than what the content of the message is. That is what releases the dopamine. The fact that they don't know it's going to arrive, but when they see that flashing light, it gets them excited and they become addicted to dopamine.
Yeah.
But let's switch gears here, right? Because you make a good case and there's going to be other people who make the counter case. But let's assume that someone in government reads your book and they agree with you, and they put together a set of legislation that achieves the goals that you're advocating for. So my question here becomes, if the tech companies are competing for our attention, if the TV companies are competing for our attention, if video game companies are competing for our attention, wouldn't we simply be, if we cut down screen time, wouldn't people simply take their attention somewhere else and become addicted to something else?
I think if you are assuming that people are, and I think there's some writers who believe in that there's something inside us that sort of needs to get distracted.
Yes.
And therefore we're always going to find something. The thing is, this is so overpowering that, and I guess you could say that some people who are likely to always need something, because they are more likely to get addicted.
They need a void. They have a void to fill.
Right, but and I actually differentiate between addiction and what I call overuse, technology overuse. So I think for the group that gets addicted, it's probably what you're saying is correct. But most of us, we are overusing because we cannot make a choice, and does not mean we're going to go and look to be addicted to something else. We might actually engage in many other activities which are more meaningful, maybe much more fulfilling for us, because we might, because there's lots of research also showing that face-to-face interaction increases happiness. Just talking to somebody, smiling, eye-to-eye contact. Lots of this is gone now. If you just go back to that, you are going to get a lot of fulfillment from your day that now people don't get because they're sitting behind screens and don't even go to the office next door, and they would rather send an email to somebody who is sitting a few doors from them.
Yes, it makes sense. I can see that argument, but I'm going to switch gears a little bit more here. So many years ago, I was talking to these executives who ran these social media companies and so on. And one of the arguments they made is that they had no problem outsourcing technology and so on to China because they never thought the Chinese could build something that understood American psychology to create a product that would be addictive to Americans. And then TikTok came along. If we take away the ability for American tech companies to do this, and other companies in other countries are allowed to compete down this path, are we not setting us up for a disadvantage?
So I think you're absolutely right that this is an international issue, and it sort of works both ways, because we are already seeing, actually there's more, and it's not surprising, this often happens with technology. I think in the US there's a great hesitancy to halt innovation, to halt technology. We sort of admire technology, we admire innovation. If you look at privacy regulation happened in Europe and other countries much earlier than the US. The US is really lagging behind here. So if anything is going to happen, and we can already see actually regulation of technology overuse in other countries. Loot boxes, which I just mentioned, which are part of games, are restricted in many European countries. China, actually, it's very interesting. China is, and not just China, which obviously is a totalitarian state, but other southeastern countries are very hard on regulating use of games and social media. Japan and China right now restrict how many hours kids can play games to very, very few hours a week. And I think China also restricts use of social media, the Chinese version of TikTok. I think it's now 40 minutes a day. I think it changes all the time. But basically, what we're seeing is not the US, restricting technology. We're seeing other countries moving much faster with this. And I think there's something very cultural in this hesitancy not to regulate, not because technology will lead to progress. There's an assumption that technology will lead to progress, and I think this assumption has to be examined much more carefully.
So I was looking at that list of you mentioned a few countries like Japan and the European countries and so on. Is there a case to be made that none of those countries have produced a major international technology player, while the United States has these open laws and relatively open rules, which has allowed these tech companies to grow and have such a big impact around the world? Is it a case to be made that if we went the route of the European countries, which have largely been unsuccessful at building these tech champions, we could end up like them?
I am thinking, first of all, I think you didn't include Japan in your list, right?
Well, Japan, the last time they've had a tech champion is probably Sony, right?
Well, they still have brother printers.
But I don't think we're counting brother printers as an addictive technology. Well,
right.
I use mine a lot,
okay.
But I don't
I
think
thought you were talking about
addictive.
technologies in general.
Yes.
It's interesting because the newest social media that kids are into is called Be Real. It's a French company.
Well, I'm not a kid, so I wouldn't know that, but it's good to, what is it called? Be Realist?
It's called Be Real, and it's interesting because it's hailed as the next thing that's going to stop the addiction. It's amazing how tech companies always come with something that's supposed to be the solution, while in fact it's propagating the problem.
It's a stronger drug.
The idea of Be Real is that you can only post once a day when they tell you randomly, of course.
Oh, I remember reading about that. You have to post once a day and it can't be a filtered photo or something like that.
Right. But the thing is, you don't know when this once a day will be happening.
Oh, and another dopamine hit. You're just waiting for it.
And can you ever leave your phone to have dinner and for any moment, because you might miss this? And if you miss this and you post late, you're shamed for posting late.
So we're shaming kids now. That doesn't sound like a good path we want to go down.
Right. So France has joined this, actually, even though France is pretty restrictive on kids and technology.
So what do you think would happen? Where do you think the conversation or the action on this will go? Do you think that nothing will happen, or do you think boundaries will be put in place? What would be the likely versus the ideal outcome here?
So first of all, I think a lot is already happening. It's important to realize that the first thing that's already happening is that people are aware of the problem, which I don't think people were really aware before about 2017. The whistleblowers who came out, Tristan Harris, Frances Hogan, made this thing a big issue people know about. So that is important. Now, I think that right now people feel very, very powerless. They feel like they cannot. They've tried self-help methods. They've tried restricting their own time. They've tried restricting their kids' time, and nothing seems to be working. So what I want to say is that I think that we are moving towards a solution. The thing is, it's not going to be one big law that's going to solve this. It's not even going to be, one big Supreme Court decision. It's going to be the same as what we saw. There's a lot to be learned from the past, the fights against tobacco, the fights against junk food.
Which is an ongoing fight, by the way.
Right, absolutely. But I think at least the fight against tobacco, if you take out e-cigarettes, I think there has been a lot of progress in that era. So, but basically it's going to be a lot of different things happening at the same time. And so, I think it's going to start from children, because what technology companies are saying, they're saying basically what tobacco companies have said and what food companies have said. It's people are choosing to use technology. It's people are choosing to smoke. People are choosing to eat at McDonald's. So it's a personal responsibility thing. And so the idea is that this is an argument that breaks when you get to children, because people are much more likely to agree for regulation to protect kids because they may not know which are the best choices to make. That's why kids cannot buy cigarettes under 21, or why schools weigh kids and send the parents the BMI. This could not happen to you when you go to work. Your employer is not going to weigh you. So I think we're starting to see lots of bills to protect children. Eventually, some will go through. Failure is not always failure. It's pressure on technology companies. We're seeing class actions by parents against social media, against game makers. Again, litigation for tobacco companies failed for decades. Eventually it went through. So there are many, many ways, and I could continue describing them, in which we're already seeing movement taking place.
Yes. I always worry that with tobacco companies, there was a smoking gun, right? There was evidence that tobacco, I think, caused cancer or something like that, and the tobacco companies were hiding that information. So I think with the case with tech companies, I wonder if there is a smoking gun out there somewhere that would overwhelmingly convince people and legislators that something needs to change. And maybe there is, or maybe there's more than one.
Yeah, so I think there is, but I think you're absolutely right about the tobacco companies, about the fact that some evidence had to come out, because really what happened with tobacco litigation is, for decades smokers lost, because basically the tobacco company said you chose to smoke, and you knew it was not good for you at this point, and you kept doing it. And only once the evidence came out that the tobacco companies knew that it was addictive and failed to warn, then the litigation changed. And I think this evidence is already out for technology companies. When I started working on this book, I suspected that technology companies were in charge, were at fault here, but there was no evidence. And I think through Tristan Harris, especially Frances Hogan, some other whistleblowers, basically, Frances Hogan came out with all this information that Facebook, which owns Instagram, had information about how Instagram is harmful for girls. They had presentations, and they decided explicitly not to deal with this.
I'll give you my own experience on this, right?
Yeah.
So about 5 months ago, I made a decision that I need to change my life. And one of the things I did is I severely limited my technology use. And I wouldn't say I stopped using my iPad and iPhone. Actually, I use more of it, but the way I used it changed. So one of the things I did is I unsubscribed from a lot of updates I was getting via email. So I decided there were certain voices I don't want in my life. The other thing is I stopped answering my phone, which is one of the best things in the world you can do, actually. So people call. If it's important enough, they'll send me a message. If it's not important enough, then they just don't send me a message. And what I noticed is there is a significant improvement in your mental health if you take control over the voices you allow into your life. And I say voices, I also mean publishing companies, platforms, and so on. It changes your health. I can see the logic of what you're saying, but I wonder if other people will be able to get it and do something about it.
So I think what you're suggesting, I don't know if you read Cal Newport's book, he's suggesting a similar system. He basically suggests 30 days of detox completely, and then choosing what apps you want to let back into your life.
I only now use the Guardian app, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and Apple News all set to business settings. Pretty much everything else I don't follow up on.
Yeah, so I think what you've done is admirable. I think people find it very, very difficult to do. And the younger you are, the more difficult it is for you to do it, because more of your social life is on social media. So I think it's the problem, and I'll say the problem is actually the existence of these suggestions. Tech companies came up with all these digital well-being tools that maybe you could, create focus time on your phone, or you could limit or get information for how much you're using your phone. But the fact that people can do this and do not succeed, and most of them don't succeed like you have, most of us, I can say us because I haven't either, basically makes people feel worse because they keep blaming themselves. They feel something is wrong with them.
Yes.
And I think what I'm trying to say is that we should stop blaming ourselves and realize that the blame is elsewhere. And yes, you can improve your way, you can improve things in small ways, but you cannot really solve the problem unless there's a systemic change here.
Yeah, I think it's also a cultural thing, because it's one thing to say you and I, we want to take back control of our lives. But if we've got managers and bosses who are insisting that we're available 24 hours a day and we're having to check our email on weekends, it's very hard for us to make the changes we want when we don't really have that much control over the decisions we're making. I think it needs to be a societal shift whereby we acknowledge that people need to have more time to themselves to think, regenerate, recuperate, and all those wonderful things. But I think as a society, we're still getting there. I think COVID made us realize the importance of mental health and well-being, but I wonder if we will continue down that path.
Right. So I think there's several important things you said. I think the idea of, I agree that employers expecting you to see your emails at any hour of the day contributes to that. But I think it's and yes, a change here would be good. The thing is, so the problem is if you constantly expect to check your emails once you get in your phone, it's not just the emails, because once you check your emails, you can see everything else. And you
Yes.
spend much more time on your phone than you intended. So I think while this could be some kind of solution, it's not going to solve the whole problem. The big problem is the lack of intentionality. So maybe I will
Yes.
check my emails because I know I'm supposed to, but then why did I just spend so much time on Facebook after that? Which I did not intend to when I picked up my phone.
It's what you say. It's a combination of things. Society needs to change, but we also need to take control of our decisions. We cannot pass the buck as such.
Right. And it's also, as parents, it's very difficult not to look at your phone all the time because your kids are out there and people expect you to be on your phone, and you can't just leave if my kids are not all with me in the house, I will always have my phone with me. The only time when I'll relax completely is I see all three of them here, and then I know I don't have to check.
So what I'm hearing is that kids are part of the drivers of technology addiction.
Kids are part of the driver, and also societal norms that everybody expects you. The schools expect you, the babysitters, the after schools, everybody expects you to be available.
And
I mean, when I was
they'll tell you you're a bad mom if you're not available, right?
right, and also there's no, I remember being, when I was a kid, and if I would get sick, there was no answering machine even at home. So if I was
Yes.
sick, the school had to keep me. In my kids' school, I remember one time that they ran out of water like an hour before the end of after school. And what they did was call all the parents to pick up early. I was out of country and I had to make sure somebody went to pick up my kids. But they did not deal with the fact that they maybe could have kept the kids for an hour.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing because as you're pointing out is that you can have the best intent to control your screen time, but there's so many things you don't have control over. And there's so many things you're going to be judged for if you're not available.
Right. So it's a combination, I think. I think it's a combination of social norms, but also importantly, combination of the fact that once you are pick up your phone, whether you are concerned that you missed something or you're supposed to be on something, you're going to spend much, much more time than the 1 minute you could have spent just checking to see if everything is okay.
Yes. It's difficult for people who don't have kids to understand this, but it's a safety issue, right? You don't know if your kids are safe if you don't pick up and respond. So it's not as if you can just say, well, I'm not going to do it. There are so many barriers here that prevent you from doing what you want to do.
Right.
Gaia, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
So I think the main thing I want to add is I think there is hope for change. And I think it's important for people to realize that there's a lot they could do on an individual basis, because a lot is happening. For example, schools make choices about how much technology they incorporate into the classroom. That's done on a school by school basis and classroom by classroom basis. That's a place where parents can act and intervene. I
Yes.
think my main message is people should not feel powerless, like this is over, but think that there are many ways in which they could be active and creating change. And it's not necessarily only, deleting all the apps from their phones.
I think you're right about that. I remember one of the things I did is that, there's two ways to handle emails. One is to ignore emails, or the other one is limit the number of emails you get. So I would tell people in my company that don't write to me unless there's something that only I can solve. If you write to me about something that I'm not the best person to solve, I'm not even going to respond to your email. You are hired to deal with this. So there's a lot of things we can do to limit the amount of time we spend on our screens versus simply ignoring things. I think people need to think about how do they almost redesign their lives, because there's a part of that as opposed to saying, I'm just going to stop. It's hard to just stop everything because people think you disappeared, but you've got to educate everyone in your life about how you're going to be managing your screen time so they know how to respect your time. I think people need to, as you say, take control, but it has to be a purposeful process. And in my case, it took a few months to set up, but it's a very good process.
And it's going to take years for this issue to be resolved. Like all these other big issues we've discussed, the tobacco, the food. So in the meantime, people have to do with what options they have.
Yes, the food thing is a really good example because it always surprises me how unhealthy food is put on the shelves of American supermarkets. There's people worrying about this, but I can't believe it's still going on.
Right. And I think the food battles are in the midst. I mean, it's the fight against obesity, the fight against junk food, and against the manipulation. It's very difficult, no matter how educated you are, to read the label and really get whether this bar or anything else is really good for you to eat.
Yeah, when I think about this, I think it comes back to our educational system and our MBA programs. Why are we creating executives that think it's okay to sell food that kills people? It should be a moral choice that we don't do that. It's not that we stop doing things because we're going to be penalized for it. We don't do it because it's bad for our fellow human beings.
Right, but it's very similar to the technology. Why are they selling food that's bad for people? Because that's food is addictive. People eat more of it. It's empty calories. They just keep eating and eating. More sugar, more salt. And it's the same with the tech. They want users to consume more and more of it. I think it all goes back to increasing revenues by manipulations of or consumers or in technology users. I've never understood why the term users is used for technology. Is it some kind of illusion of empowerment we are using and we're in control?
Yeah, to me, it's always surprising because if you're producing food that's going to kill the people that give you money, that can't be a long-term good strategy for you.
Well, it kills them slowly.
Kills them slow enough for some of these executives. But it's the same thing with technology, right? If you are producing technology and you have prompts and you have certain attributes you're building into your platform and your media that is making people depressed, I don't see how that can be a long-term good strategy for any business. But I think executives are too short-term focused. They want to make money, cash out, and let someone else deal with the problem.
Right. The thing is that people don't realize they're depressed, and also they feel that what makes them feel better is getting this new notification. So they keep looking because then they get the dopamine release. So it's a
Yes.
never-ending circle.
So I think for you and me, we should start a dopamine distribution company. People can buy the dopamine from us. They don't have to get it from social media. I think we've hit on a very big idea here.
Yeah, that would be great.
Dopamine shots around the world. Gaia, thank you so much. I think that what you're saying is very true. Hopefully more people take control of their lives. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great day. Ciao.